All right, today we're going to talk about comparing fractions. We've done this already, but when we compare fractions, we need to look at them and make them as much the same as possible. Now, these ones aren't too bad because they're already both out of 6, so they're quite easy to compare. Is 3 out of 6 more or 4 out of 6 more? When the bottom number or the denominator is the same, then we just have to look at the top number or the numerator. So in this case, 3 is less than 4, so 4 is larger. Press pause and try those below. All right, so now that we've taken a look, yes, our denominators are the same, so I'm going to look at my numerator or the top number. 3 is larger than 2, so 3/12 is my larger fraction. Comparing 3/4 and 1/4, again, they both have the same denominator, so I can just look at the numerator or the top number. Comparing 3 to 1, 3 is larger, so that makes this fraction the larger fraction. Again, the next one, they both have the same denominator, so I just have to look at the numerator or the top number. 5 compared to 6, 6 is the larger one. 6/8 makes the larger fraction. And here we have 2 as the bottom number or denominator. So we look at the top number. Well, they are both 1, so then they are equal. Remember, we can also compare fractions by creating fraction strips. So for example, this is from your Math Makes Sense textbook. It's a little bit small, sorry about that. Remember, the key when you are using fraction strips is that they all need to be made into the same length. Okay, so here we have 3/4, which is the same length from one end to the other, as 3/5, which is the same length from one end to the other, and so on. So that part is absolutely key. Then we need to divide them, and when we divide them, remember, we need to divide them into equal parts as well. So fourths, each fourth needs to be about the same size, and you would shade in 3. Here we have fifths. Each fifth needs to be about the same size, and we would shade in 3. And lastly, we have 5/8, and we divide this into 8 parts. Each part needs to be about the same size. We would color in 5. And then to compare them, we would look, okay, the largest one is the one with the most colored in. So this would be our largest fraction. The one with the second most filled in would be our middle fraction, and the one with the least filled in would be our last fraction or our smallest fraction. Again, key here is that the strips must be the same length. Remember, when we're comparing, we want to make things as much the same as possible. The other way that we can compare is we can create equivalent fractions. Now, in order to create equivalent fractions, we want to make it so that the bottom number or the denominator is the same. So, for example, here I am comparing 2/3 and 3/5. What could I do to make those both the same bottom number? Well, 3 times 2 would be 6, 3 times 3 would be 9, 3 times 4 would be 12, 3 times 5 would be 15. Oops. Now let's try over here. 5 times 2 would be 10. 5 times 3 would be 15. Oh, here we go. 15 is a common number. So we're going to make them both into fractions out of 15. In this case, I multiplied by 3 to get 15. So what I do to the bottom, I also do to the top. So 3 times 3, use your multiplication table if you need to, is 9. 5 was what we had to multiply by here to get 3 times 5 to equal 15. What we do to the bottom, we also have to do to the top, so we're going to times by 5 here. 5 times 2 is 10. Now we can easily compare these two fractions, and we know this one is the larger fraction. So when we go back to 2/3 and 3/5, 2/3 is the larger fraction. All right, now it's your turn. Press pause and try to compare some of these fractions. You can use either fraction strips or equivalent fractions. Your choice. Choose whichever strategy works better for you. Either one. Press pause and try now. All right, let's take a look at the first two. 3/8 compared to 3/4. Now in this case what I did is I made them into equivalent fractions by realizing that if I multiplied 2 to 4, I could get the same bottom number, which was 8, which again makes it easier to compare when they're as much the same as possible. What you do to the bottom number, you also have to do to the top number, so multiplied by 2, which is 6/8. So then that means that this is the larger fraction. In this case, I decided to do fraction strips. So I created 2 strips. They had to be the same length, okay? So from one end to the other, they were the same length. This one divided into 3 parts, this one divided into 6 parts, 1/3 colored in and 2/3 colored in. Well, which has the most colored in? Well, in fact, these are both equal. All right, for this next one, what I decided to do was equivalent fractions again. I realized that if I times 4 to 9, I could get 36, and if I multiplied 9 to 4, I could get 36. In fact, that's a really good thing to do, is to multiply this fraction with this bottom number and multiply this fraction with this bottom number. So I multiplied both by 9 here to get 27/36. I multiplied both by 4 here to get 16/36. I now know that this is my larger fraction. 1/3 compared to 1/3, they're exactly the same, so they're equal. 2/5 compared to 2/3. Again, I could multiply them by the opposite number. So this one I'm going to multiply by 5 and by 5, and this one I'm going to multiply by 3 and by 3. I'm going to end up with, I'm going to run out of room a little bit here, so I'm going to move my work up here. 2/5, 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 5 is 15, 2 times 5 is 10, 3 times 5 is 15. Now they have the same bottom number, they're easier to compare, and I can definitely see that this one is the larger fraction. As well, we could compare, well, they have the same bottom number, but this one is divided into more parts, so this would have to be the smaller fraction. All right, let's continue with the second row. I've moved everything up so I have a little bit more room. Here I have 1/2 compared to 6/8. Well, whenever I have half, what I tend to do, and you may not have, you could have chosen to do differently, I decide, okay, well, what would be half of this? Well, half of this would actually be 4/8. So then I automatically know that this is bigger than 1/2 because half of 8 would be 4. You could also create equivalent fractions there. Let's get that out of our way here. And we'll continue. Next we have 2/3 and 4/9, sorry. And I could look at them and try to create equivalent fractions, or I could use fraction strips. I'm going to use equivalent fractions. I'm going to multiply this side with 3 on the top and the bottom, and this side with 9 on the top and the bottom, just to make sure I end up with equivalent fractions. 9 times 3 is 27. 4 times 3 is 12. When I go over here, 9 times 3 I already know is 27, and 9 times 2 is 18. Now I can easily compare 18/27 to 12/27, 18/27 being larger, so that makes 2/3 also a larger fraction. Now let's move this so I can continue to do some work here. Next one, we have 6/8 and 1/3. I'm going to again use equivalent fractions. I'm going to multiply this with the opposite number and this with the opposite number. 1 times 8 is 8, 3 times 8 is 24. Oops. 3 times 8 is 24, we already figured out, and 3 times 6 is 18. So then I know that 6/8 is the larger fraction. And work for the very last one. I have 2/4 and 1/2. And again, when I have 1/2, I'm going to see, well, what is half of 4? Half of 4 is 2. That means that this is 1/2, so they are equal. Please go ahead now and try your review of comparing fractions to see if you can manage it, and please hand in when you are finished.